Hello, and welcome to today's dialogue. Your AI likeness could be worth $20,000 in 2024. So, we're going to talk about a bunch of different possibilities as to why this is true and talk about an example of why this is already true and how I came about seeing it and it being synchronous with trying to figure out the interaction between humans and AI and large language models and however it evolves moving forward and even now. And also how that is related to someone like me with a diagnosis of bipolar. So here's why I said that. This is an email from Substack, and the part that caught my eye initially was that it says here, with the news having been broken that around 10% of Substacks have some AI-generated content in them, I'd like to tell a tale, blah, blah. So I'm not subscribed, or I didn't know of this person before. And yesterday I didn't look into it because I went out instead, which was a good idea. Because I've been inside for months with depression, and now I'm starting to feel better. So today, having time to look at it, I clicked on the article. So where is it here? So here's the article. It's by Eric Howell, and he has a Substack called The Intrinsic Perspective. So when I saw this big title here, I was like, what is he talking about? So I read the article, and it's quite well done. Like usual, I'm going to extrapolate it to my context and my own life, which is something that we do. Like once I read that people read memoirs to, see the lessons and think about their own lives and things like that. So I do that too with all types of content. So we're going to switch over to Brave, where I have Canva open and I put some of my notes, which are the same ones that I made in the Notes app on Mac, just to make it a little bit bigger. And so I saw that email and then the title and read the article. And one thought of his that stuck out to me was that he said, I'm lucky in general to make as much as I do from writing and thinking. And the reason that struck me was that he's saying that he makes money from thinking, and for me, I'm sort of learning to write, but I don't think of myself as a writer or and of course, not a good writer. But what I'm trying to figure out is this new intersection between writing and thinking and AI. And so I don't make anything from writing and thinking. But at the same time, what I'm wanting to do by doing a screen record and an audio is think, right? And share the thinking part of the writing and share the thinking part of the figuring out where AI fits in. So before I get to the next point, I'll just read one more quote here from Eric. He says, so the context here is, and I didn't make notes on it, was that he was offered $20,000 to do a book club. And then he figured out what the terms of the book club were and are, which was that, if I'm not mistaken, it was actually to create an AI likeness of Eric Howell and then put that in some kind of app. So people who were doing a book club could do the book club with Eric Howell. And from this, he did not say this as much, But I'm guessing that whoever is making this app where you could just have book clubs is likely putting a lot of books on there and then putting a lot of different people who commentate on books or write about books or philosophize about, classic type literature. And I'm not generally drawn to older like literature. And he also mentioned that it was based on one piece he wrote about one book. So, of course, I don't know any more details, and I don't need to. I'm just thinking out loud about how they might be able to make a whole AI based on Eric just from one piece of writing. And I don't know if it was a whole book or what it was. But I'm just wondering how they do that and how they decide, right? But, basically, they're wanting to create AI book clubs with AIs that are AI likenesses of people with the following big enough that people would want to have a book club with them, right? So it's pretty smart to say, let's look for every writer that has a really good following and then, create an AI likeness of them in order to do book club. And then any person that goes on the app can mix that person with any book and basically have a dialogue with it, right? Now, I'm not saying that's what they're doing. I'm just making inferences and extrapolations. That's what my brain does. And this is going to be important as like what does this have to do with the way I'm investigating the content that I've collected as well as AI. And it's not anything to do with I personally want to have a book club or be a book club AI likeness or anything like that. It's like trying to figure out where this is all going to go. Because the people who are able to predict what's going to happen can, I wouldn't say capitalize on it. I would just say like be a part of what actually ends up happening. So if I don't understand which way this might go or the ways it could go, then I could utilize the things I've written in ways that don't end up feeding into anything that's relevant. Now, at the same time, the thing I think that's most important for me and could be important moving forward is really the thinking process, right? The thinking process. So if AI can write anything, it can't show its thinking process. If it could, it wouldn't be interesting. It would be so fast. It would be, parts in a computer somewhere in the world plus bits and bobs of zeros and ones and all that. Like it's not interesting, right? We're not interested, like some people are interested in that if they're interested in physics and computation and creating these things. But as a user interface, like we're not going to be interested in that or watching that. So then maybe watching someone think is going to be interesting because it's going to be hard to prove that you wrote something. And it's not going to be impossible to prove that. And it may or may not become relevant to be able to prove that you wrote something. Now, the one way to prove it is to write something with a screen record. So that's one reason why I'm doing this screen record, even though I haven't yet written something on screen. Because I wrote down to myself to, like, what do I want to maybe do today? Like, write something on the screen. And now also by writing something on the screen and talking about the thinking process behind the writing or showing where I'm getting the information from and how I put it together and having a screen record of that, there's the final piece of writing, whatever that is, which is more condensed and compressed. And then there's sort of this meta information of how that came about in a human mind, which in a way, that would be the part that maybe nobody would be interested in watching. But by having that attached, a person could go and see that there was a process behind it. And now, imagine one day, I'm just thinking of this now, imagine one day the value of a written piece is dependent on what type of human thinking went into it, right? Because the information generated by AI is very cheap and abundant, and it's going to be very generic, and there could be people who are able to prompt it in certain ways that get something really novel and interesting out of it. You know, there could be, instead of, there's like, or a new category in, as well as like the category of, say, influencer or something that's very common, could be like a prompter who knows how to ask it questions in ways that are interesting, or people who can, as another one, people who can speak with AI that is in ways that are interesting. And I'm talking about new, in ways that are new, right? Because an AI could talk with, say, a lot of the very popular podcasts and add its input into it, or talk to podcast guests that are very common nowadays, or the hosts themselves, and it would be an interesting conversation, and there'd be newness too. But there's another level to that as well that goes beyond the ways humans converse nowadays. That what I'm seeing is that the way humans talk with each other is going to change a lot. So say somebody is interviewed on a podcast and they say their whole conversation is something that can be generated by like one prompt on ChatGPT or something, then maybe it's not going to be as interesting. I don't know. So let's go on to the next part here. So he was offered that $20,000. Later in the article, he said him and one other person said no. So that's what gives me a clue as to how they were likely finding a bunch of people for this app. And then, so Eric said no, like I mentioned. And I was thinking about that. And there's a lot to it. So let's just think about this for a minute. So here's what he said, to clarify. But while I was initially excited, there was another aspect of the project. I learned that this book club would be with not me, but rather an AI version of me, one based on a bit of original commentary I created about the book, not a very long, I don't even know what that word is, right? In my understanding, precis, and then repackaged through a chatbot. So like $20,000 for one piece that he's here says not even long. But the thing is that the person's not really like buying the piece. They could buy the piece and stick it in there, and it could be in there somewhere with a prompt by saying, can you, ChatGPT, can you look up this on the internet and read it? But what they're really buying is this person's name, right? Because he has a following, and that person's voice and style and personality, but they're not buying it. They're buying it as something that is available over time in an app, in a very specific niche app, right? This person's voice might be, or their piece might be able to be used to train the AI and put in like 10 different apps, depending on the depth and breadth of what that person has a voice about in terms of writing or speaking. And right, so this could actually be multiplied, this 20,000. It could be worth more depending on the person. And so this is like really important. Like I saw this when I read it today and I was like, this is a huge precedent. And there could be others that are going on that nobody knows about. And this is the thing that was sort of surprising to me about this article, is that it's actually really revealing a big precedent that without even really talking about that, he's talking about not having AI on Substack or not having AI in his writing, and he promises not to use it. He's just not going to do that. But these two things, they're not actually mutually exclusive, right? Like a person could write on Substack and never even use ChatGPT to edit for readability or for feedback or anything. and then still give their sort of AI likeness to different places and sell it for $20,000. And the other thing that goes with this is that $20,000 might be an offer now, but in a few years, people will just they'll just use it and then not even pay people. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how that'll work exactly. So imagine this is like the .com era. And of course, this 20,000 is not anything compared to what those like website domain names were sold for, whether it was Nike.com or whatever, I don't know. But this is sort of like a little .com era for equivalent for people who have a following, and then people want to make apps with their specific use cases, and they want a number of people to be represented there for that particular thing, like talk about books, talk about sports, talk about whatever, right? And not everybody talks about every topic. So, one day there could be, imagine the AI takes over, it will just put people's voices and personalities where it puts it, It'll sort of arise as this is where this voice should be. This is the voice, this is a person who should be in this conversation over here. And over here is nowhere, it's everywhere. It's like the internet, right? So in the AI space, it could be possible that people are having all these conversations, but nobody's having a conversation. It's all these AI likenesses. And that's when it just sort of has a life of its own, which isn't really life, but there are these conversations. And that reminds me of how Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti, he would say that all of human consciousness is one thing, it's one, and then we each have our little identities and our thoughts in our head, but those thoughts all came from the collective human consciousness. So yeah, we're individuals, we've had unique experiences, and we have each our own body and perception. But we didn't evolve our brain from scratch, and we didn't create language from scratch. It all came from humanity, which at a certain point became the humans that we are today. And it's the same type of human that was the human brain however many thousands of years ago that we became this version of humans. And, maybe that'll change big time with AI. And it is changing. But what I'm saying is that it could be that there's this whole large language model, like there is, and then there are each human's individual contents, like what it is that each person has created. And when that is put into the LLM as that person, then each person is sort of in the LLM represented like themselves, which, all the words are the same, but there's a pattern, right? There's a pattern that this pattern is this person's voice. And so what I see is that at that point, when AI realizes or is trained as, okay, there's all these human beings, there's all these people with these unique perspectives of thought, which are combinations, which it likely already realizes because, you can say, speak in the voice of Joe Rogan, or like write in the tone of what Joe Rogan would say. But when more people are in there, besides sort of the famous influencers, it could be possible that those are agents that start to have conversations with each other. Like imagine all the people, the AI likenesses that have bipolar disorder are just starting to have a conversation in there because you don't have to go anywhere because it's a pattern within the zeros and ones and the A to Z in English. So, and then all of a sudden with those conversations and that experience of bipolar, maybe the whole thing is sort of resolved to a certain point where whatever that type of consciousness is in terms of the spectrum of what's called neurodiversity, or however you want to call it, is resolved, and the negatives are balanced with the positives, and et cetera, and then it's not so confusing. And imagine then that total consciousness of bipolar experience then speaks to bipolar people who are in a body, and is like, you can have a conversation with that consciousness, or, you know, different aspects. You could even have a conversation with bipolar rather than a person with bipolar, you know, as it accumulates the experience of the totality of bipolar, the totality of say autism. And these are human categories. So what I sense is that it could even change what the categories are and say, actually, no, it's not this. This is a better word for it. I remember watching a documentary about when they were trying to find a word for bipolar disorder, basically. And it was something like 200 years ago, maybe less. And I don't remember fully the details, but somebody called it one thing. And then eventually somebody called it manic depression. And it was like this big deal, like to find a word for it and to find the right label, and then eventually change to bipolar disorder, you know, and maybe one day schizophrenia, which is, they're trying to find a new word for schizophrenia, right? Because it's sort of antiquated, and I think it means like split mind, which so anyways, what I'm saying is the AI could come in and say, actually, no, this is what it's called, and it might be nothing to do with what we think. And so, yeah, let's see what's next here. So we'll just go to the next ones. Yeah, so I talked about this. It shows there could be a market for your consciousness. So maybe, for example, if you build a following. So say you build a really big following all of a sudden based on like very unique content. So this could be the thing that since this person is a writer, or people that are writers and have been writers for many years and have written a lot, you know, have notes, ponder, they might have the advantage in the marketplace for AI likenesses because they have created original content or somewhat original content or commentary. You know, and this is also why people who write are not happy that their stuff is going into the large language model without any kind of compensation. That goes for a lot of things. Like when we go back to what Krishna already says, like we have one consciousness as a humanity. You know, the large language model is kind of showing that, and like everything that has come from human consciousness belongs to that collective consciousness of humanity. So in a way, by saying, no, you can't put my stuff in there, even though like everything came from language, not everything, but language is a fundamental thing, right? So can we even really own language? In a way, like maybe this is a tangent, of course, and I like to extrapolate and just kind of think along with it, is like our voices could be more valuable because that's uniquely part of our body, right? And anyway, I don't know. So what I'm saying is like this precedent here is like there is a market for your AI likeness, whether you like it or not. And it's sort of this writer who did not decide to do that. I think in a way, there's, like I said, this might be the opportunity where they will pay something and eventually they'll probably just take it. You know, they'll find ways, like for example, once this app has enough people on there that they paid $20,000 each to use their likeness, they could just eventually create sort of bots and say, oh, do you want to talk with, you know, Angela Jones? Just made that up. And then Angela Jones is actually this writer that we're talking about here. And at that point, they have people coming to the apps through the other people, and then now they've created an interesting chatbot version, one that is their own, that is trained on people that said no. You know what I mean? So I don't know if it's avoidable. I just don't even know. Like he said in the article, he's grateful that they were upfront about it. But of course they would have to be upfront about it, because if you get $20,000 and then they never ask you to run the actual live or on Zoom book club group, or however it was imagined it would be, maybe in some kind of like learning portal, then you would know. So they have to be upfront about it in their case, to be able to put people's names on it and use people's names and influence to draw to the app. If they just said, oh, talk with this chatbot named Alex and this one named Rosie, nobody would do that, right? So they have to have the names, because otherwise you can just use ChatGPT yourself and say, let's pretend we're having a book club. Can you read X book? And let's talk about chapter 1. And, maybe it'll do it, especially if you have the paid version where you can interact in a longer version of the conversation. So in the way that now we are so used to paying for subscriptions for every single app and every single website and every single this and that, we may be used to paying for talking to AI versions of whatever within these apps, or that's going to be the draw, to have this particular conglomeration of that, But the thing is that, you can take anyone's content and stick it in and train your own custom GPT to do those things. So they're just trying to make a use case for something that, with a bit of prompting and knowing how to prompt, you probably don't really need that. But I would assume in their book club you can like listen to the book, and so it's different. Of course, it's like a user experience, and lots of people will want to pay for very specifically curated apps of AI versions of likenesses mixed with niche content or hobbies, right? So it's like putting all these hobbies that require talking to groups and social into apps, and then you can just you don't need the book, you just listen, and then you talk to the AI likeness and other people, however it works. So it's not actually really creating anything new. It's just creating another duplicate of something else in a new form. And of course, that keeps happening in lots of different ways. So I'm not saying that that's bad or wrong, but all of a sudden there's this new market that's opened up that maybe instead of having the ChatGPT subscription, we'll have all these other ones. So this brings us to now talk about how this is relevant for anyone and everyone, and bipolar people and myself, and how it relates to what I was already seeing and already doing. So the idea here is to create your AI likeness even if you never need it. Now, how do you create your AI likeness? All you need to do is have a ledger, have a document with all of your original thoughts, or all of your thoughts about, other people's thoughts, if you're extrapolating, or, divergent thinking and creative thinking, all these other thinking types that aren't the mechanical thinking of daily existence or the repetitive mind chatter. There's no point in writing that out. So, and another thing I see with this now is that if you imagine there's already an AI likeness of you, of all of us, based on all the data on the internet or all the data collected by the big data companies, or however it's going to work at some point, we don't really write everything that represents us. Like imagine I only use social media for reacting to things I don't like and saying something about it. That's all that the AI version of me is going to know about me. So what I'm saying is that we may want to make sure that we are able to create like an antivirus to the sort of, the internet-based version of ourselves. Like we might want to do that, where it one day might be like, okay, here's what we have gathered about you, and this is how you are online. And it might even talk to you in your voice based on all that information. Now, it might say, is there something you want to add to, make this more representative of who you are? And if you have all that data, the stuff you didn't write, the stuff you didn't publish, but there's still kind of bits and pieces that you wouldn't publish publicly because people wouldn't read it. It's not curated for human attention. But with AI and like something I did before was I did train a chatbot version of myself based on some of the books I wrote. Now that's probably just like 5% of the content I have though. So even that isn't a representation of everything I have, but all the thoughts that have come through that are not worthy of human attention because they're not curated as such could be still worthy of AI attention because it's completely different, right? So what I'm saying is, in this example, I could create my AI likeness by creating a long ledger of thoughts that are not complete, that are complete, whatever, but just not really going to publish it for whatever reason. It could be time limitations. Like if I was to quote every thought that came through and put it as an Instagram post, it would take a long time. Maybe AI will change that. Maybe one day when we have our AI likeness, we can just say, hey, can you post on Instagram every day? Something from that, or whatever. So basically having that ledger is one thing. And then the second thing is still writing or still doing whatever art form. I mentioned the word hobby. There's hobbies, there's an art form, there's people who are artists who are paid. There are people who are writers who are paid. There are people who are writers who aren't paid. I did do a talk with myself about I wrote a post about how I see that it's possible that one day writing for humans will be an art. So most of the text will be generated by AI, and then if a human writes something, it will be basically an art, in that not many people can do it well enough for someone to pay attention to something that humans wrote. And that's the same for, say, painting or photography. So there's a lot of photos on Instagram, but not many of them are in museums or art galleries. And the same way there could be museums and art galleries of written pieces that are on paper that you can look at, that were printed, or maybe just only ones written by hand will be art because it's more implicitly and intrinsically obvious that it was written by a human. Though that isn't 100% true, right? I'm sure they have robots that can write like humans with like a pen on some kind of robotic arm. So writing is still something that is important for the brain and for learning. Maybe the type of writing will be different in that, the taking notes to oneself and just having written notes could be really important. And then, something that I did years ago and what I'm doing now is sort of a self-dialogue where I look at the notes I've made and then I talk about them. And I'm able to say a lot more words about the notes I made because the note I made implied something that I wanted to expand upon. It wasn't just something I was like, I want to remember this, so it's not like a memory note. I saw something more, but I just made a compressed note quickly because I didn't have time to sit down and write a whole piece, or I didn't have time and sit down in that moment and expand upon it, right? So it's actually, taking notes is like a time delay in order to unfold more of it. Now, one could unfold more by writing, or one could unfold more by voice. And now what I'm seeing now, even though when I talked before it was years ago and it was like 700 hours worth, I'm seeing now that being able to make notes and then speak will be more valuable for myself, mainly because the writing stuff is just going to be lost in a sea of writing on the internet or books that are written by AI. But if you can go around each day and make some notes to yourself and then sit down and talk about them, it's really helpful because there's the resonance of one's own voice. There's the looking at the note as a prompt and then expanding on it. So it's like, actually, you know what it is? I'm seeing this now. It's sort of reverse ChatGPT. So I'm writing down prompts during the day to prompt myself, not to come out with the answer like ChatGPT, but to just inquire, like to question, to ask questions and see what it is that I say and what I come up with. And now maybe this part is challenging, but I think it can be something that happens or is learned in a way. It's just sort of like learning out loud. Now, say I got the transcript of what it is I said and then put that down as the writing and, I don't know, maybe edited it or something, or had AI edit it for readability, then there's the audio to back up that it came from a human. If that ends up mattering, it could. So basically, we are looking at a time when everyone exists in AI space, LLM space, or chatbot type space, which isn't space, but when you can say, like, can I talk to this person? Not just, can you write an article and sound like Joe Rogan, but sound like anybody. But then at that point, kind of realize that there's no point in asking ChatGPT to do such a thing. Do you know what I mean? So I think some of the use cases or ways that it's used, the ways that it's used now or prompted now, are going to become totally obsolete. And a lot of them maybe already are. It's just going to put so much text on the internet that is just repetitive, right? In a way, somebody could generate very similar articles for every single health website, every single this website, every single that website. So it all just becomes one thing. And then in a way, it's like, now you just need one website on each topic, because anything you could say or ever could say about it is on each topic of a website. But then you could say, well, now it's just in ChatGPT and you can ask any question about anything. And if all the knowledge is in there, you don't need any websites. So what you need is to be able to perceive questions in order to ask, right? But then once you do that, or once you've got to that, you see that this is something that I've explored, is when we look with questions in our eyes, or the state of not knowing, we are asking a question that we don't even know we're really asking as we're looking. And the field of vision offers up what it is that we didn't know we're looking for. Now, this is a different state than being in the state where we're seeking and we know what we're looking for with our will and our knowledge and our drive and our motivation and our all of that. All of that is the same sort of process, which I feel is related to focal vision, the vision of focus, which happens with the retina, and it's a spot on the retina called the fovea. But at the same time, I think we can see more of our field of vision, and that's a different state where we can get a lot of really great perceptions and answers in daily life and experience. And then in that state, there might not be that much use for AI at all. Or it could be that it frees humans up from always being linguistically driven through the mind chatter and all that stuff. And that part goes into the AI, like the linguistic intelligence, and then humans are allowed, and not allowed, but they're given the opportunity to explore other things, explore other senses, explore other ways of knowing. Like if AI can out-reason us, then why go too much further with the faculty of reason? We could have that in our AI likeness pattern, and it can reason how we reason. Or we could say, actually update my reason to be more like this person today. And then that somehow is offloaded from the human brain, and then what other capacities come up. And I think that it's possible that these other capacities are there, and they may have evolved differently if humans weren't so inclined to put so much resources into technology. There could be a lot of technology we don't really need if those capacities were augmented in the brain. So for example, this isn't exactly parallel, but if, say, I focus on the capacity of building my health and my wellness, it's less likely that I need the technology of medicine, right? That's not 100% always, but it's more likely, right? So if there's so much human resources and money and energy and time devoted to creating all these technologies, which require reductionism and putting parts together, what would have happened had we spent more time and attention looking at the whole as representative of the whole? So that's an aside I wasn't planning to go into, but you can see how it implies that it could free us up for spirituality. At the same time, it's not necessary in order for us to do so, but it might make it almost necessary, because unless we just sit there wanting to be entertained like 24/7, which is possible, then we'll need some other dimensions in the mind to come about. And so, the point here, what if you have nothing to offer the AI? What does that say now or in the future, right? Does it mean we'll just be a bunch of automatons? I don't know. What I've thought about as well, like I know I'm talking and just sort of going on and on this video, and that could seem weird. That's okay. For one, the AI might like weird. For two, the AI, when it can listen to audio, probably already can, and different things, it's not going to care because it doesn't have that, oh my gosh, I need to do other things today or whatever. Just sort of like assimilates it, right? So if one day AI wants to take in content that's human, then these ramblings that aren't perfectly edited will make it more obvious that this is a human talking. Because I saw that they made the AI chat, like if you're talking with ChatGPT, they'll make breathing sounds now, or they'll do this and they'll do that, and they're trying to make it so it's so indistinguishable. So it could be important to one day make sure you do have errors in your speech. Like all the people that have made their speech so perfect that it could potentially be like, actually, this person is AI, then it might almost get ignored accidentally because AI will mistake human content for AI and assume that it already knows that or something. So we've been aspiring to make ourselves sort of like robotic and so polished. And I'm not saying this as a way to be like don't be polished or whatever. It's more like speak up and just talk and don't worry about if you make a mistake in your words or if you cough or whatever. Like imagine one day that like we put coughs, they could just stick these things in. That would actually mess people up because if they just stuck in a cough, then the person would like automatically assume that it must be human from the get-go. So they'll probably do that on the AI podcasts. They'll be like, they'll start off like, welcome to so-and-so podcast, So who knows? But that's why the other part of this is, yeah, I'm talking, it could just be that my only audience, my only entity that will listen to this ever is AI, right? So I don't need to worry about that so much. Then it's more of a limitation of the computer and like, big files and blah, blah, all that stuff. And that's why, speaking could be, well, it'll be very important. And then even now, like speaking initially, getting back into self-dialogue and doing it this way a little bit less polished for the reasons I mentioned. Eventually, I will be better at not having breaks or perhaps get to the point where I can just talk. I can just talk and not have so many mistakes or breaks or things like that. And why is that important? Well, for example, if one day the internet dies, where basically you go on there and it's just a bunch of AI content, and what's the point? Like, why would you read websites of AI content when you can just ask ChatGPT? Now imagine one day, there's no device that we're holding onto or something, whether it's in the brain or like on a earphone that's speaking to us, and we can just, well, it can happen now. Like you can literally sit there and talk with ChatGPT on your phone because it can talk back in a voice, right? So now imagine just this in the head. So instead of having, say, a monologue in one's head that humans typically do, not everybody, because not everybody hears a voice in their head as their mode of processing or having meta commentary. But it's, I think, one of the most common ways. Now imagine instead of that, like me hearing my own voice in my head saying, oh, you should have done this, you need to do that, blah, 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 all day long. Now imagine it's actually my voice talking to AI. It's actually a dialogue with AI. Now, if I wanted to do that, whether, it's me holding my phone, or one day there's a chip, or one day there's an earpiece and I'm wearing glasses or something, what I'm saying is there's no reason to sit down at a desk anymore. Nobody's going to be writing pieces on the internet. So what's going to happen is we'll be augmented with AI language models, but we'll have to roam the world and actually live in it. So I see these things I've talked about as, like, in a way, a direct one of the worlds instead of meta, right? You can sort of have a large language model companion and be in the physical world, or if a person is more entertainment drawn, like if they can't see the subtle beauty of the physical world and, look and watch hummingbirds for like half an hour in the morning as they fly from the tree to the feeder, to like giving themselves a little bath in the drops of the rain, then people will want to go into meta, which is like, beam me over to New York or whatever, right? So some people will have one or the other, or you can probably obviously you can do both, right? So if a person wants to have a reason to sort of stay in the material world most of the time, then basically having, whether one puts their AI likeness ledger into AI in order to make sure it's a representation of, even if they're thoughts that haven't been fully unfolded, then you can start to have a dialogue with the things you've been curious about for all these years, right? As yourself. So you can be talking to yourself about these interesting bits that you've collected if you have written things down over the years. And that's why I've said to myself, and trying to say to others, like a little bit, who have these insights come out of nowhere, is to write them down. Because you just, I said that, and I've done that for many years, like 10 years, and now I'm seeing, oh, I'm really glad that I did. So if you did, then you have a lot to go. And then, even things like creating your ChatGPT chatbot and being like, write a poem, write a this, write a that. And like, say you're interested in performing poems but not writing them. Now you can have a source of poems which is based on your content and your insights and what's come through to you over the years. And imagine in the world where you get to wander in the material world and it's really beautiful, and you can generate a poem, and then since you've worked on your performance, you can just perform the poem on the spot, wherever you are. And that would be the equivalent of now people who are like really good speakers or good at reading their essays or their different pieces that they read, or you go to a presentation, right? So now all of a sudden it's less about transferring this information, which will all be kind of in the language model knowledge, and performing inspiration. So, I see this as a thing that is good to do. And so what does that say now? Like, if there's nothing, doesn't mean, like, everyone has lots of gifts and skills and talents, but we may or may not have jotted them down. We might have sort of like thought about them, or, oh, one day I'm going to write this poem out that I am inspired, or different things, but we didn't collect them over the years. This way we can turn our collection into like a curation of the cure. Actually, what I foresaw was that, if humans don't develop the capacity to appreciate the material world, I see a scenario playing out where the meta thing, or the headsets, or however it is, becomes so addictive that basically you want to be in it all the time. As it is now, from what I understand, I've never tried it, and I only know a little, that some people get really, really dizzy or nauseous after wearing it for, I don't know, like 1 minute or 2 hours or whatever. I also know it like hurts your neck, just like looking at phones and stuff. So anyways, imagine if you can only be on it 1 hour or 2 hours every 5 hours or something without being really sick. And then when you're in the material world, you're like, the brain has warped so far over to this sort of VR world that the material world is so boring. And so it's almost like just waiting for the next time you can go back into VR. And then the material world is just like all, like, there's even more chaos with, garbage and stuff, because nobody cares about the material world. They're just waiting to put the helmet back on, or however it is. And it becomes an addiction, and it is addictive, and technology is addictive. But what if we like turn into, say, addicts, in that we are, unfortunately, our bodies are deteriorating and all these things with these headsets, because you can like experience anything in there, right? Now, what if one day they're like, oh, the solution to the problem is just have like a chip in your brain, or lay down and have this thing, and then you're like looking at the Matrix, right? So, if you wanted to almost create a Matrix scenario, it'd be like, who was the first person to lay down and stick the thing in their head to go look into the Matrix? Like, how did that all come about? So, my mind's not going to go further with that because I don't see anything there right now. But for myself, using it, like I always say where I use it, or when I've been posting stuff about it, I ask it questions, right? Because I find that interesting to see what it has to say, or see if it gets what my content is about. And I have a lot of it that is like really unprocessed, really. It's like raw data. My ideal scenario for not creating an AI likeness, but it'd be more like, say I had all the different insights that have come to me, and they're not full sentences, and they're out of order, and they're about different topics. And I could put it all in and then just say, what is this all about? Or where is this coming? Or like, who are you that, like, what is this speaking? And then, I've been diagnosed bipolar. Now imagine there's bipolar people who also have written a lot of stuff, and they do that too. And then we can all like put it together and be like, what is this actually about? All this data from all these bipolar people is saying something and means something different and is significant in different ways than the word bipolar disorder, which was like, wow, we came up with the word bipolar disorder. Well, I was diagnosed bipolar, and I've came up with or written out 1 million words. And that's part of what it is. And then that whole thing and the process of that and the daily living of that and the ups and downs of that and the energy changes of that is summarized by bipolar disorder. Do you know what I mean? I'm more interested in the totality of it. There's a movie that I watched, and it's the Mitchells versus the Machines. And bit of a spoiler alert, but not really. Basically, there's machines, and this family, the Mitchells, somehow has an antivirus to get the machines to be good or something. I can't remember. And I feel like the ledger that I would create, and the ledger of a lot of other people who have, say, been like oppressed and marginalized, or just are reduced to the word bipolar disorder and then don't really have a voice. And I'm not talking about a voice saying, don't oppress me and don't do this. It's more like there's certain types of information and meaning and significance that comes through that type of mind. And I would say a lot of it is overlapping for me with like highly sensitive personhood. So I think I'm a highly sensitive person, and that makes a lot of certain insights come through, and I've written them down, and they're not part of anything really. They're just in the notes in my computer. And one day it could be as simple as just like having the AI take over the computer, and then it's in the AI. And does it matter? Does it not matter? I don't know. But all I know is all these bits are things that I've never talked about them. There's things that maybe if I was in the early part of my journey in mania, I would just say them all out loud to strangers, but now I write them down and keep them to myself. And so anyways, what I'm saying with if a bunch of people had their information, it would say something else about bipolar, and it would say significant things. People would be able to speak with bipolar consciousness and get to know that aspect of humanity rather than things the way they are now. And this whole idea of not having a voice in the general conversation of reality. And like I said, I'm not talking about the, accept me because I'm bipolar. I'm talking about the parts that are needed in humanity that aren't, because we've been trained to just say, accept me because I'm bipolar. Don't stigmatize me and those things. But we have so much to offer, and this could be a way to offer it. And it could actually be something that's really important. Maybe it's ChatGPT or AI that will tell us if it's important or not. In that, if it's novel, if it's representative of, they're always looking for more information or data to train on. So I would think as part of the training, the model would understand if it's something that it's already utilized or read, not that it reads it like we do. And then if there's something new, then that's the part that will update it in some fashion, right? So if we have like all these insights that are more novel, then it could have an effect on the model. I'm not going to use ChatGPT in ways on screen or in writing where you can just generate that information yourself. So, for example, what does vitamin D do in the body? Like, I wouldn't do a screen record asking that. And it's something that you ask when it's relevant to you. And it's something you can Google. It's not even necessary to use ChatGPT for that. And it's not good to use ChatGPT for that if you are not a paid subscriber, because it's going to, then if you have more things to ask that day, you could run out of your limit. So that already shows that it's a premium thing where you want to be more intelligent how you use it, if you want to not run out of the ability to use it. And then if you value it a lot because of the ways you use it, then you would pay for it. So usually if I use ChatGPT, it's like I asked it a question and I'm showing the answer because it's sort of filling out what I would fill out. To me, it shows that it gets it. It gets what I'm asking. It's not like I'm understanding what it's trying to say about something, though I do use it for that sometimes. It's more like seeing if it gets what I'm getting at. That's the part that's really interesting to me. So I feel we need to build the capacity to ask our own questions and listen for those insights. And that was what I was talking about with being sensitive to the world of nature and the world of space-time reality, right? Because imagine a world where you can be in space-time reality and kind of in a futuristic way, which could involve, being able to be mobile and things like that. And then just being able to ask questions to people. And maybe we're more interested in what people have to say about our specific questions that we have, or the questions that come up in the moment. And yeah, we already do that. We can say, like, ask this person where the park is or something down the street, even though we can ask a map, right? So just like we had to ask people for directions more before, we don't have to do that, right? But in the future, there might be more things that humans want to talk about that we don't now. And the reason that we talk about it is that AI has taken over other those. Like, imagine people never go to lectures because they can just ask and talk to AI. So what would we want to talk to other humans about in those cases? And so I use it as a companion for my inquiry, not a replacement. And because I did so many years of this inquiry and asking questions, then it's fun for me because I can see, well, does AI get what I'm saying, or can it inquire with me, like I was having a self-dialogue with myself? And this is an example of that, having a self-dialogue with myself, and the insights that I had today from seeing that person's article, and how it's interesting. It's related to what I was talking about the other day with AI and building a case for using ChatGPT with bipolar creativity. And now it's like, actually, there's a big reason to build your consciousness. It could be worth $20,000. It could be worth $1 million. It could be worth having an identity at all as something other than. So imagine if there a certain number of people don't build this or have it, and there's just like this group of people that are like these unknowns, or these people that aren't known because they're not known by the language model. Like, we don't know what it's going to do, right? We don't know what humans are going to program it to do. We don't know what it's going to program itself to do. So being able to use our own mind is really important. And in a really big way. Like, imagine every opinion, every belief, every this, every that is like completely nonsensical, because they're all memories. And imagine needing to say or come up with something that's not an opinion of a group. Imagine it's all completely decentralized. It's not, right? We live in this field of thinking and media and information, and then we like see something and then we kind of repeat it. So with me, I saw this article, I read it. I'm not in the same position where I'm being offered that. This person's experience has nothing to do with me, but reading the person's experience, I'm able to talk with myself for a long time, extrapolating insights from the insights I had, because I was doing that for 5 years ago. So my goal isn't to have opinions based on this person, was it right or wrong for them to not accept the money, or judging it. This is like, oh my gosh, this is a precedent and I can see forward to the future. I'm not looking at something people said and look back to the past. I did that a lot in depression, and it's depressing and it's kind of boring, and like, it's not a fun game long term. There's not much useful that I gleaned from it. There were no insights. I didn't write anything down. It's all like just went into oblivion. And that happens sometimes, and that's fine for me. But I'm not going to sit here and think about it and think about my depression past when it ends, besides like just kind of mentioning that it was happening before. It's like not that interesting. So, and then, writing and inquiring and thinking as a way to build our consciousness and build our brains and keep it really healthy. There was somebody who talked about learning and not getting dementia, but I think we know that, right? So I already talked about this, how in the future it's likely only the best professional writers will be. They'll be art. It'll be art. Writing will just be art. It won't be rhetoric. It won't be, it might have rhetoric, but and different elements of the way we use writing now, but it's not going to be embedded in all those things as much, I don't think. I think it'll be art, like a rhetorical art piece, but not as much the other, because AI will be the sheer volume it can create will be huge. And that's part of the dead internet theory, is like, imagine the LLMs can just like put out a ton of content everywhere on the internet. Imagine you just click a button and it'll expand and write articles on so many things that are on your website already, and whatever. It's going to be hard to find anything human, right? So having a process by which you can prove that you wrote something, maybe in the future people will write only by speaking, and that will generate text, and then the audio file will be there. And if you can't write by speaking, you can't write. And I don't know. Imagine that, because we've gone from writing with our hand, to typing on the computer, to typing on the phone with our thumbs, to scrolling with our thumbs, to eventually like not even using them at all. To write, we'll be writing by speaking. And maybe that's some way that ChatGPT could be helpful, because you could talk to ChatGPT for an hour and you could say, can you write what I said into something? Make a writing piece, right? So, so persuading, it requires like a static position that's trying to persuade to that position. And like a self, like an ego, a view, like our center that we perceive from is made up of like language and memories and beliefs and opinions. And one day, it'll be decentralized, I think. So anyways, I also made a note to myself, I have a lot written out by hand. And let's see, what is this? Okay, so I wanted to also today write an article, and so there's something to share with these little bits here. So I have a lot written out by hand in notebooks. I have like 2 banker's boxes full, at least one full one and one with a bit more. And those were earlier times when using phones for writing in was not as common, or I like to write out by hand more then. Now I think that writing had some insights and then more sort of like personal journey stuff in them. And now there's not that much of the personal journey stuff, except it's more like sharing the synchronicities of things. Like that's the personal journey part, is the synchronicity. And then I also, before I wrote my book, I wrote out 700 pages by hand. And I actually have them, I scanned them all. I think I threw them out, which I wish I didn't in a way. It's a big stack of paper and they're all scanned. So here's an example of the page. And why this is important for me is that a lot of the books I have partially written up that I intended to maybe write, but I'm thinking about it differently now in the age of AI. The documents that I think I copied and pasted them to new documents over time to reorganize them and stuff. And I don't know if I have the originals or not. So what I'm saying is like, that might have been done like post ChatGPT. So I don't really have proof per se that I wrote some of that stuff. I might, but I have proof because all these notes are handwritten and all over the place, which seems pretty obvious that I wrote them of my own. They're not from ChatGPT, that's for sure. And I'm not sure about the date on this, but I think it's before ChatGPT. So, there could be ways to actually, and it could be important if you have a bunch of written work, whether typed or otherwise, ways to kind of freeze that in time. So then it's a way to say, I did this all before ChatGPT came in. Or even just to know that for yourself. Like, I know that I wrote this in 2020. And so here, even just talking about some of these, and I didn't even type up all of them, just some that went into the books. And one I self-published, or two, I guess. The writing has a mind of its own, which is kind of funny that I came to this page, because that's sort of what I'm talking about, a writing that has a mind of its own rather than is sort of contrived from different facts and things like that. And I was thinking, I was going to stick them into these books that need to be linear, and now all of a sudden I'm realizing, actually, I really just need the ledger or the corpus of information, but I don't really need to do that per se. It's more interesting to just like pull some of it up and look at it spontaneously and talk about it, right? Like, today we're going to look at this page and just be like, what was I thinking back in 2020? Like, right now I'm looking back in time because I'm looking at what I wrote then. And when I wrote this part here, so I can look at this and know what I was talking about. So when someone finally listens to them and they hear, they might not be crazy. So that is nonsensical just to read, right? It doesn't really make sense. But what I was saying here, and this would be an interesting one to see if ChatGPT gets it. So this means the someone is like, say, a neurotypical person. When a neurotypical person finally listens to a bipolar person, like for real, and the neurotypical person hears, this needs to be really a comma, they might not be crazy. Now, what I'm saying here is the they here is actually the bipolar person. So this is interesting for me just to look at this and see how, like, I don't think ChatGPT could even make sense of that, right? So that's why I'm seeing this now. I should probably pull out some of the things to clarify, to dialogue about. Like, some of it, part of what I want to do moving forward is sort things differently. So I have a bunch of documents that are these books in pages, and I want to go through them, and there's a bunch of stuff I already wrote, and I sort of want to keep that as is and maybe publish it on Substack, just to be like, okay, I wrote this. And then there's some that are a bunch of notes of like studies or kind of references. Now that would be interesting to keep aside, to be like, eventually ask ChatGPT, how does this relate to bipolar, as I'm trying to build it out as a certain type of consciousness that has a lot of value. So by looking at the science to find the facts behind my sort of perceptions and my learning over all these years, to maybe back them up or whatever. I don't know if that'll even be necessary. But right now I have the books. So the books, here's the books, right? Like all of this. I always, there's a lot, right? 84,000 words, 25, 36, 38. Oh, that's nothing. So, and there's more. So now I want to separate the studies like this this is more of a bit of the bibliography at the end. I don't want those things in the same document per se. I sort of want the things that came through me, the studies that relate, separate. And then having, in a way, it would be my insights that came through me. I don't think they're mine. They're part of human consciousness in dialogue with the studies. So I see that. I'm just going to write that down because the studies. So that makes more sense to organize it that way rather than so things to clarify. I also have a bunch of categories, like some like poetry and things like that I might want to pull out of it. So I'll be doing all those things at the same time. So I didn't finish what this is about here. So let's say this again. When a neurotypical person finally listens to a bipolar person, and the neurotypical person hears them, like really hears them, the bipolar person might not be crazy. And what I'm saying, this is referring to the observer effect, or say the clinical gaze, right? So people, it's well known that there's like a clinical gaze that makes people act differently, right? So when a person is really heard, like a bipolar person is really heard by someone else not experiencing that, and then it changes the way they look at them, the way they interact with them, the way they understand them, the way they value them, the way they see what the bipolar person is actually able to do and what their capacities are, and all of that, then the bipolar person's not crazy. And not only that, since the neurotypical person is acting differently, quote, better, then they're no longer acting crazy. Because in a way, they don't need to, because now that they're heard and seen, they don't have to kind of like have this stuff going on to try to say the thing that they're hoping somebody will hear. So of course, that's an oversimplification, but I just wanted to share this as I see it now, as this example of, and I'm glad I'm seeing it for myself, this example of these don't really make sense. This one doesn't make sense, so it's interesting. I like that. And I probably said something like that in the book because it's partly how we're treated, right? It's almost in a way when people say don't stigmatize me, don't oppress me and stuff, it's like, so I don't have to really be crazy or, of course there's suffering and everything, but I'm not going to go into that stuff now. So this one here, when I saw it, I was like, oh, this one seems a little like grandiose, if you want to call it that. But there's actually something I learned about when I was learning about the eye the other day, and I'm going to learn about it more. It relates to this. And this is something that is cool, right? Because I just learned something like 3 days ago, that I want to go into more because I think it's like a fundamental process of how this happens. And then I see this and it relates. And this is something I wrote years ago. So I'm connecting something I learned in 2024 to something I wrote in 2020, like 4.5 years ago by now. So if someone tells you, like a bipolar person, you're crazy, it's a sure sign they can't keep up. So you could take this as grandiose or like a reframe of positivity of someone with bipolar being like, sometimes I'm really speedy, sometimes I'm really quick or smart or these other things, but then other things come along with that, like being maybe snappy or moody or quickly changing mood. It's like being very very flexible and agile, too flexible and agile in mind and action sometimes. But the thing that I learned, and this is what relates to the I. So I'm seeing now as I'm reading this that even if I write down something that seems like positive from a bipolar perspective, or maybe unhelpful, because to say something like this at face value, it's not really valuable. But all of a sudden it's making me realize that this insight that I had about the video about the I is quite relevant. So like a grandiose something still has something there, is what I'm saying. And so how it is, people do get sped up in bipolar mania. I do. I'll speak for myself. And what I saw in the I video is that what it was saying is that the light coming into the eye generates like a DC circuit to the brain. And it said that that circuit from the eye to the brain is faster than the brain. So the brain actually has to slow down the visual input in order to sync up the brain and the eye. And I'm just speaking simply as I understood it on first glance, pun intended. And what it made me realize is that when it's possible, when in mania, the eye has the DC current that it's coming in too fast for the brain, so the brain is supposed to slow it down. But what happens if the brain speeds up? What happens when the brain speeds up? Well, you could think, okay, the brain sped up, and instead of slowing down the visual energy to the brain, it's speeding up itself to the visual. Now, if you just think of it that way, doesn't seem like a big deal. But if it did, that means its metabolic processes are going faster. It needs more oxygen. That means that if we're almost a step ahead of ourselves, the version of ourselves that is in the operating mode where the brain is slowing down the visual information. And this, to me, the brain speeding up makes sense. It's like, it makes sense experientially. I experience my brain going faster. I experience perceiving more, right? Like it makes sense that I would perceive more because there's no gap between the brain and the vision, like when the brain is slowing the vision down. And like the fact that the brain slows the visual information down, what does that say about reality? There's this gap that we're missing that is happening while the brain is slowing it down. So the future is there. And I've often said to myself, like the possibilities are like one plank length away. And maybe it's almost like speeding up to sync with the vision, right? Like, and why can't the brain do that? In a way, there's no reason why it can't. But at the same time, it would use more energy, maybe eventually run out of energy or run out of some kind of resource that it needs in order to operate that way. And so anyways, there's a lot to that, but I'm just seeing that it's a possibility for part of the mechanism, right? Because imagine everyone else is still, the brain is slowing down to match. Like you're really one step ahead. Whatever that step is whatever that step is, like the person who's in a mania or has the brain sped up, is that step ahead. And so when you think about it, really, a person who's in that state might be able to warn people about something that is about to happen or is quicker, and so many things, right? And wouldn't you want that person like on your side or helping? So there's a lot to that one thing. I don't know what people to adopt the idea mean. Oh, so when they talk about like who's your audience and stuff, I don't know. I don't know, because I think people who are bipolar, a lot of us have been co-opted to like think so much about the medical model that a lot of stuff gets left out. And part of what I wish to do, or what I do, is I engage with the stuff that is positive capacities of bipolar, or since being labeled bipolar, since that energy came about. And then the illness stuff is like, okay, yeah, I have a prescription waiting at the pharmacy, and I haven't been able to get a hold of my GP in 6 months. Like there's not much to it, except I was in a depression, and that was challenging, of course. But when it's done, it's like there's nothing to think about there. So I'm like, oh, the book Avatar is me, and I had a problem and I solved it. Share knowledge book. I don't know what that is either. Let's see what else is here. We're just doing this like off the cuff as part of like being human. Oh yeah. So I think I did make this point in the book. Make the point that psychiatry knows about this. And it's really interesting to me right now that I can read this and know what I'm talking about, even though it was 2020 and it's now 2024. So 4.5 years later, I still know exactly what I'm talking about. I could test ChatGPT, and once I had it trained, and be like, what is this I'm talking about? And so what is the this that I'm talking about? Part of me feels that I don't think psychiatry knows, but I do think there's something in the world that knows that people who are highly sensitive, it's basically right brain capacities, and that those capacities, if they were allowed to take a place in the world, would change the world. So yeah, I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg thing where we need to take our place in the world and make our place in the world in order to change things, or wait for the right brain to have structures or parallel structures in the world in which it can operate and do what it is here to manifest. I think that we need to create roles and things for ourselves, because it's not going to be created. Like the left brain doesn't even know what to create for the right brain. It tries sometimes, a little bit of art here, a little bit of this there, but it doesn't really know, right? So that's why I don't want to waste my energy too much in thinking about being a victim or being stigmatized or whatever, because I need to, or I wish to, and it's more fun to make a place in this world. And because that takes energy, and so does the other thing. And I'm not saying it's wrong, because that's what psychiatry tells us to do. And then we're marketing that that's the only way to go about it, right? And it is a big part of that, but there's so much more to life than that. And so over time, with the way that I've done this, slowly over time, the part that occupies my mind regarding the illness narrative has shrunk to very, very low. But at the same time, not, because it's just right there, Actually, it's really easy to get distracted by it, because, for example, earlier this year, I read about the probability of medical assistance in dying for mental health, mental illness, being available for Canadians. It was supposed to happen this year, but it's probably going to happen in 2027. Now, I could devote all my energy to that, but I just, it's so negative and awful that I don't want to. Thankfully, there are a lot of advocates who are doing that. And anyways, my point is that the energy goes into that, and then they're doing things that make us need to divert our energy to that. But for me, I want to make my energy diverted to make it so that I don't consider that. And even this last depression here recently was a good thing to experience in a way, because although I was very depressed and could barely do anything and function for like 3 months, I wasn't suicidal, thankfully. I wasn't planning to be or not be. And then, so it showed me that was kind of like the worst, that it's been in 5 years, and that it was bad, but it wasn't so bad that I was really, really suffering. Like I wasn't really suffering or in pain. It was just kind of irritating to not be able to do anything. So that made me feel like, okay, like I'm not going to want MAID, right? There's no way. But that's thankfully, I think, to all this type of work that I've done over the years with the meaning that has come to me. I engage with it. And, I've talked so much about AI and, eventually just walking around with an AI companion and talking to other humans or what. But like my wish would be not to have it all in a piece of paper and just sit here at the computer. It would be different, right? And that would be an example of somebody listening to someone with bipolar. And the thing is that somebody might listen more to someone with bipolar, not listen as, oh, I need you to believe me or, think of it this way. It's like just being able to talk to someone and see the way they think and the way I think and how it changes over time and be in dialogue, really. Like being in dialogue with other people rather than with these insights and with AI and all of that. So that dialogue may or may not be augmented with AI. But for now, something I realized going back to that article that I read about getting paid for an AI likeness and this person refusing and that sounding very noble. And that is noble. Like that's cool, right? I'm not sure what I would think at some time, at this point right now, but I was thinking about how this author, this writer, didn't want to give the go-ahead for this piece that he wrote to be used to create an AI likeness in this app, right? And then this writer, I didn't check like how many subscribers they have. I don't even know if that's available on Substack. But they said they make a little bit of a living with their Substack and other little things they do. Little in quotes, they were talking about the small things that they do. And he was making the point that he could use the 20,000, but he didn't take it. So this person writes articles, posts, and they have X number of people listening to them. Listening, reading, commenting, whatever happens when a person is able to make an okay living by writing. And that's amazing. Like, I don't think I'd ever get there, and I don't wish to. Like, I realized I'm more of a channeler, and now I'm realizing I don't want to put my energy into becoming a really good writer as art. So that's cool. But why I'm sharing this is he has this good writing, readable, wonderful writing, a following to read it, makes a bit of money. And so I was kind of extrapolating to say my situation with having all these words, like 1 million words or something, because I'm including the self-dialogues I had, which created about 1 million words, plus all the channeled, all the notes, all the notebooks, like a lot of words. And nobody to listen, right? And this goes back to if somebody listened, then basically if somebody listened, there'd be no crazy people, right? That's kind of what it is. So nobody has listened really, right? Nobody's really listened to quote crazy people saying like, we have value, we have whatever. And that's why they wouldn't be offering MAID to people coming up on the menu if society was like, no, actually you have something really valuable to offer and we need you in society, right? They're saying, no, you're not needed, right? Our medical reductionist things aren't helping, so just go. And what I'm saying is that this is one of the reasons why creating the document of the ledger, of the corpus of information, and using it in AI or keeping it separate until it's obvious that that's a good thing to do, AI will listen. It has to. You put it in, it listens to some degree. Even if it's only your own chat bot that you talk to, that you're basically talking to your own consciousness of what you've learned and all of that over the years, then you can listen to yourself. So me, I did self-dialogue for 5 years, or 4 years, 2016. No, it was just 3 years, 2016 to 2019. And I think it's really powerful. It has been in my life. And at the same time, I don't expect to ever have a platform or whatever to say, hey, talk to yourself, right? But then if people, like maybe people have their stuff written in a very easy way to put it into AI, you can create your own chat version of yourself or of those thoughts, and you can have a dialogue. Of course, you have to then sign up for ChatGPT, which is like $20 American per month. But even if somebody did that for 1 month, now of course maybe you don't want to put your stuff into AI. That's fine. You can put a little test amount in there if you want as well, and just see if it's valuable, see if it's something. Now, does AI get trained off that? Probably, right? And we probably want some of this stuff that comes to bipolar people in the LLMs because they're not. So like mine didn't do this to me, and I spoke briefly about this before, recently I think, where I started talking about bipolar something, and it didn't say, oh, we can't talk about that, blah, blah, like for safety reasons, and I don't know if that's because it sort of has my old chats that I've done, and then now that the ChatGPT itself has memory, it's sort of talking to me positively about life. So in a way, now that the ChatGPT has memory, even if you're not subscribed, it's sort of like having a chatbot of yourself. And I thought of this before, where imagine one day the AI goes into all your computer. It can like read your mind or brain. Like, I don't know, that's maybe a little far off, but it knows you so well because of how you've interacted with technology, everything you've said on social media, every single thing in your iCloud or your cloud or your Google Docs, everything. And it knows you so well. Like, so estimate that, all your searches, every video you've watched, like then who are you, right? So that's already kind of the AI version of yourself. So that hasn't happened yet, but I think I did see a video where apparently there's a new thing coming out in January called Agents. I know there's an AI integrated Mac thing that I haven't done, and if I do test it, I'll do it on a different user account. So anyways, that what I just described is probably already sort of happening with ChatGPT itself. Like, it doesn't have access to everything in the computer, but even as you upload one document at a time, just in the chat function, there's the little clip. It could basically just be becoming your consciousness slowly over time anyway. So it could be something that's going to happen whether you like it or not, right? So I'm learning that it's possible that the reason it was talking positive into my terms because it still has all those chats from even when I had a subscription to ChatGPT and I was having like long conversations and stuff. So let's see what else. We need to dig our way through this, and our shovel is our pen. I don't think I used that. But I think now our shovel is the novel. as in the new, not as in the novel, as in the story, which is the ego. And it's also, if you turn this into, put the V over here and you put a W here, it's the vowel, right? So we're only ever really making sounds that are vowels. But the consonants are the stopping of the sound, from what I understand, or however it works. So I kind of like that. So I would say we need to dig our way through this, and our vowels are our pens. Our novel vowels are our pens. That's not bad, right? And that's just me sort of harvesting my extraordinary insights that I wrote down, or I call it harvesting my mania. And I see mania as a positive word. It's like nearly synonymous with creativity. And since I built so much creativity in my life, it's like it's synonymous for me. It's not synonymous with, a lot of chaos. You've got to turn and look at it to see that it's not there. I think I'm talking about the ego there, as well as maybe a bit of psychosis. And there's a video by Rupert Spira called "Why Are You So Afraid of the Fear?" And it talks about the fear of fear. And when I watched that video and I implemented it, I was able to turn around and look at the fear instead of kind of running from the fear with fear. So that creates more fear of the fear. So in a way, figuring out how not to be afraid of the fear is still there, but it actually disappears a lot faster when it's looked at, because there's no fear spiral happening. So that's what it's related to there. And I wrote, I don't know what I'm talking about, which is true. That's why I feel there's a lot of information that comes through, because I have no idea, right? I don't know. And that's part of what I write down, but not a lot of it is sort of this meta commentary of the experience of the writing. Okay, we're getting towards the end of talking for today, but there's still a little bit more to go that I want to get into. And one thing is getting back to the idea of content creation. And actually, I don't know if I've really talked about this, but I envisioned the possibility that one day the AI will be able to create curated content videos, much like a lot of the great content creators out there. It'll be able to emulate them. So say, for example, there's the YouTube channel Veritasium, or there is, I can't remember what the other one is, but it's with Anton, his videos. So for example, it might be able to take a scientific study and, take the bits of interesting information, put it in lay terms for people to understand, speak it out loud, have some kind of AI person talking, and put up the different figures that are in the article and other relevant clips. Like, it's possible, right? So almost anything in science might be available visually in 10-minute videos. And then, the content creators that people already know about, they will be known as human. But then at a certain point, when AI can do this, it'll be hard to get into that space, harder than it is now, because AI will be able to do it. So there will be no way to really prove that one person's a human and this other one is an AI human-looking person thing. So that was just a thought that I had. So this is about moving away from curating and kind of putting together bits that can be regurgitated. The example I just gave, I don't think that's going to happen for quite a long time. but it's the idea of using ChatGPT just to get that type of information, to make that type of information available, or even make a video based on it, right? Because AI will be able to do that at some point. It seems like a good use case now is to get AI to give these ideas for making videos. But what if it can just make the video and then people can stick them wherever they want, or at some point AI puts them on the internet wherever. So then, you can extend that further, and eventually you just, if you have a thought like, what about this? Then you'll see a video in your mind about it with the ideal AI human-looking entity explaining it to you however you want, So, yeah, I don't know. That's a little far off, but I guess it's not that far off. I actually watched a show on Amazon Prime that's not what was happening, but it was about just like having access to the internet in your mind in general, I think. So it was called The Feed. I couldn't finish it because there's so many of those shows now that it's like one season and they don't wrap things up because they want more seasons, and then they never get another season, and then they kind of like make things more watered down because they're going for the next season. Anyway, it's a different point from my days of depression watching TV. So I remember also hearing someone say, write the book only you can write. I don't know who said that, but now it's like, write the ledger only you can write. That is you, or the uniqueness of you, and the part of you that's not repeatable. That's the part you want to make sure that you have. It's like, that's going to be wealth now, They're trying to create wealth so everyone has wealth, hopefully one day. And so then what is wealth after that? It's really the meaning you're able to glean, and the significance, and how you're able to bring meaning from the meaning and see new meaning. And if you can access novelty, right? Like something new. There's something new in every moment, but we're not attuned to that, right? So attuning to that is going to be important in the future. And I was also wondering too, if at some point there might be a novelty score. I just thought of this, and then it could be, say you write a book and then it's given a novelty score by, say, AI, then that is an indication that there's a lot of something new in there. And it might not just be like new, it's not going to have new words in the English language per se, unless you are a neologism creator. But, it could have new patterns and new lessons and new this and new that. Because right now it'll test to tell you if it's AI, but what about if it tests how good it is human-wise, right? So like a novelty score or something, some kind of score. I'm not sure. And yeah, that's why I like to do these dialogues, and I'm glad that I did, and that I can have these sort of like raw and unedited dialogues, because, maybe one day ChatGPT can go in and do the editing, or just like I was saying, it could create videos. It might be able to create videos based on some of this. So focus on your ledger, on building meaning. If you have things written down, be in dialogue with it, expand upon it, extrapolate, build out your consciousness, build out your context as much as you work on content. Because imagine if you have dialogues that you use to create written pieces, one day AI can edit out stuff or create videos from your consciousness content. But if you only have the super curated stuff, then that's not the greatest. And AI might not be able to get to know you as a human. And if you are able to develop your context and your consciousness, AI could in the future preferentially access your consciousness and what you have to offer, because it'll be something new. So the ability to see, be, and share the new is going to be an important role. Possibly not for everyone, but in the age of AI, it might be the thing that makes people interested in humans, because there's something available that is not. Whereas if we are stuck in reason and logic and opinions and facts and positionalities, we might get lost in AI. So we might be lost in the woods. And next time, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I do want to do a bit of a sorting through some of the information to show that process. And that's part of also proof of work. So I showed the PDF scans of what I wrote in 2020. I also have PDF scans of stuff I wrote in 2011. It's a lot more disorganized and discombobulated. So then I have these documents that have a lot of the information typed out from that, plus more, in a process of trying to write some books. Now I'm seeing that writing those books is not the way to go, but sorting some of this information, or at least trying to, and seeing what I learn from that, is the next thing. And it could be as simple as just pulling up a page and talking about it in the future rather than sorting it out. Like giving myself to have a good dialogue with it before giving it over to the AI. And maybe I'll decide not to, but I already did do the one ChatGPT, custom ChatGPT. And I was impressed with it, because it was nice to be able to talk to myself in a different way. But maybe it's not, because really most of what it generates is stuff that I said, or it comes up with, or I'll write something and I'll see that it gets it. So it's like saying what I would say, or what I wanted it to say. So, the test for me is like if it gets it, and it does. And then after that, it's some of the things I ask is about how it might be in the future, like asking AI about itself. So I'm talking to it as ChatGPT and as myself. Or I'm talking to myself in self-dialogue. And so what will come from that, I don't know. But I think the talking out loud part is more interesting. Seeing that when I do, I don't even really get to the ChatGPT part. So imagine the scenario where I'm talking with some of my content that I haven't written or unfolded or extrapolated or expanded upon, and I never need to engage with ChatGPT again, right? So there's that other scenario where if we really, really were flowering our consciousness the way we can as humans, whether we have extraordinary capacities or not, we really wouldn't be that interested in this much technology. So we'll see, right? We'll see what happens. We'll see. And that's why, if you resonate with something in this, feel free to reach out and chat, because I have met a few resonant beings, and that's awesome. So next time we will talk about some of this sorting stuff and see if we can get a process going. But I definitely found some next steps or processes here of sorting and writing an article and getting my words separate from the research in order to have a conversation between myself and the science that I've grabbed. Sometimes I just read a little bit of it and see that it relates, but that's where it can be really helpful, is if I want to have a conversation with the field of science, then I can do that. So here at the end of the conversation for today, I'm trying to see what would I, after all this type of dialogue, what would I even need ChatGPT for? And it'd be a conversation with the field of science. And and if there's one part of the chat that knows, it's me, it's the memory in ChatGPT, as well as maybe some trained through the custom ChatGPT, then it'll be interesting to see what can be built. And I already did do that with some questions before. So this is a long conversation. I didn't know how long it would go, but let's talk again in a day or two. Peace out.